When I was in the Marine Corps, I met this really interesting man. So no offense to my, sailors, those who served in the United States Navy, but coming from a Marine, my impression of the Navy was that they're typically undisciplined and didn't quite take fitness to the level that we did. Bearing wasn't quite there. Commitment, these are just my impressions as a brainwashed Marine. This guy was different. I actually ironically met him in training about the time I started to realize I probably wasn't going to see combat like so many of my friends. But the sailor had actually seen combat, quite a bit of it. He was tasked with ground-side units going through Iraq. And I'm still, right out of training, combat training, recruit training, all this stuff. And I'm pretty gung-ho. I was very aggressive and ready to kind of throw down and fight anytime, anywhere. And being in a training environment with sailors, they were uncomfortable. But this man who had seen combat, he sort of gravitated towards us, and even though I hadn't seen combat, I'm just in training, I think the mindset was more similar. I remember him getting up from a table and screaming across the table at this young sailor who said, I think I could have made it in the Marines, and, went to war, and this guy is screaming at him saying, no, I see the fear in your eyes, the hesitation, you get people killed, and he got a little bit more graphic. But I remember this guy, actually, we kind of hung out, he was a cool guy. He was Norwegian. He had, he had a pretty good style. He styled his hair, all this stuff. Lots of tattoos. These piercing blue eyes, very Norwegian looking. And I remember talking one day about religion and philosophy. And this is a time when I'm a Christian, but I am sort of, I'm struggling with my own faith at this point. But he said something that has really stuck with me. He said that he prays to Thor. And, at first I thought this was a joke. But the man looks me in the eyes. And he prays to Thor and Odin. And he told me because the things that he's seen, the things that he's went through, the things that he's done, he point blank told me, I don't pray to Jesus because, Jesus is weak. I pray to Thor and Odin. And I won't get too descriptive, but he basically said that he thinks Thor and Odin would approve of some of the things he did on the battlefield. Maybe that shouldn't have been done, while Jesus would disapprove. And as he saw it, Thor is strong, Odin is strong, Christ is weak. And I remember, true story, this guy had some friends who were in MARSOC, which is Marine Special Operations. And by the way, typically when people tell you stories like this, they're just lying. They're just exaggerating things. This guy was the real deal. And his goal was to go to Valhalla. So he wanted to get through this training and then somehow get tasked back with a ground-side unit so he could die in combat, so he could get to Valhalla. Cool guy, maybe ever so slightly post-traumatic. So he told me that he had a pact with one of his MARSOC friends. His MARSOC is like Marine Special Operations. That if he didn't die in combat, whoever was, old in the hospital bed, the other one would show up in the hospital bed and stab him through the heart so that he could go to Valhalla. And the man's telling me this with just the straight face, serious, just, dead, cold eyes. And I remember like PTing with this guy and everything. Cool guy. But what's strange is since then, I thought this was just a very unique person, and he was. But I've noticed since then that this was the beginnings of sort of symptomatic of a larger cultural movement. A lot of people today are trying to return to some sort of paganism or some sort of even witchcraft. And this sort of transcends one demographic or ideological group. In the past, and even in the present, many people who try to return to paganism are sort of a far sort of secular right mentality that I would see as misguided, even very bad. But nowadays, it sort of transcends that. So I just want to share a few reasons with you that I've observed that paganism is on the rise. I actually know several men who pray to Thor and Odin now, and it may not make sense to you, understandably, but this is a thing that's happening. A few reasons I think this is happening, and what I think just a basic solution is. The first reason is disillusionment with modernity. I think so many people have sort of to realize that what we grew up with in the West, sort of material wealth in the sense of the ability to buy lots of cheap plastic stuff made in China, the ability to consume lots of cheap entertainment from Netflix and Hulu or cable TV or YouTube or whatever, that leaves you, it doesn't give you a cultural identity. That stuff's not real culture. It's just pop culture. And it doesn't really tell you anything about who you are. It doesn't tell you anything about your values except for just consumerism and hedonism. And I think a lot of men and women at this point are just so sick of this, and they realize that this isn't something worth living for, building one's life around. And I think the obvious tendency of modernity to sort of reduce values and post-modernity, those things are different, but there's a lot of overlap between modernity and post-modernity. These systems are both very skeptical of pre-modernity and really any sort of a narrative that would give a people meaning. It focuses, typically, post-modernity will focus on sometimes the individual to an extreme. The expression of self-identity, almost as though I'm in islands, this extreme form of individualism, whole autonomy, as opposed to any sort of traditional identity that we've been handed in the modern West. And I think there are people out there who realize this has left people empty and shallow. And so people are looking for the things that modernity and postmodernism have sort of stripped away. They're looking for meaning, they're looking for ethnic identity, they're looking for a sense of purpose or some cause that they can give themselves to, some sense of spiritual meaning, that just a sort of a vomiting out of this hedonism, this rejection of consumerism. The idea from the 80s, 90s, 2000s of I can just buy a bunch of cheap plastic stuff, watch a bunch of entertainment, eat a lot of fast food, maybe do some drugs, whatever, and I'll be happy. Just, if it feels good, do it kind of stuff. That's left people so hollow that I think there's a movement back towards looking towards the past as, trying to find some kind of grounding, some kind of roots. And so I think there's also, the second thing I've noticed is the desire to be closer with nature. So in that modernity, post-industrial age, we're so far detached from, we can't escape death, but we're so far detached from death in our day-to-day lives. The food we eat, we don't grow it, we don't hunt it, we don't kill it. It's processed neat and tidily away from us and then sort of delivered to us in these plastic wrappings, or in paper wrappings at the fast food place. So often we don't even prepare our own food that we buy at the grocery store anymore. We just buy it prepared for us. We DoorDash it. And we're so far detached from nature. We live our lives in cities or in the suburbs, and it just left us, again, I think, a little bit hollow, a little bit disconnected from nature, and in some sense humanity, because we are a part of this natural world in which we live. And so many people, I think, are looking for return to nature. So I've had several friends and seen other people sort of say that they'll go outside to the mountains or the woods, and that's their church. And then, of course, I think that, just common sense stuff, like common things like the shows like the Vikings or other, popular level, portrayals of Norse mythology or Greek mythology or the Roman Empire in pop culture has just sort of stirred up an interest in it. Now, I'm going to get a little bit blunt here, and I'm not attacking you. I'm just saying what I observe as a trend. And again, this is not me saying that I'm better than you in any sense. If you happen to feel this way, if you feel like you're leaning towards some sort of a mystical religion or paganism, but I do think those things are a mistake, and I'll be a little bit blunt in a minute. But I think, first of all, the third thing is sort of ironically, a skepticism of organized religion that we grew up with. So we're old enough as millennials or Gen X or baby boomers to remember a time in which most people attended church, maybe our grandparents, things like this. We attended Sunday school, and we sort of are skeptical of the preachers, of the moral majority of people like this, and I can relate to that. But to just be very blunt here, I think we remember maybe, the racism or soft racism of some people in the past that were religious, or the silly things some Christians or preachers have said, or the anti-science, or et cetera, or the corruption, or the hedonism of big megachurch people, or preachers who would preach against adultery and then commit adultery. I get all that. I get all those complaints. But to just be very honest, I think if we sort of outsource our religion to the ancient past into something that's not living. Now, I do think there's answers in ancient religion, but if that religion is not living, it died, it's dead. And it stayed dead Christianity, has been said, has died many times, but, has risen again. Paganism died and is sort of just dead. If you outsource your feelings and thinking about religion to the ancient past, to paganism, you're just romanticizing it. Sure, you saw the corruption and the silly things about some Christians today, but what you can't see is the silly things and corruption and the far worse things in ancient paganism. Of course there were corrupt religious leaders. Of course there were affairs. Sexual immorality was promoted. And no, it wasn't good. It might sound fun. It was absolutely not good, and it definitely went past the boundaries that we accept as being normal today, because Christianity stood between us and the ancient pagan past and stopped things like the acceptance of pedophilia, the acceptance of prostitution. And if you think that's good, look at the Roman brothels and the graves outside where those women were taken advantage of by powerful men, and then their children were murdered and discarded, all for the pleasure of men. Women weren't treated with dignity and respect. Now you can complain about Christianity, and I understand that, but Christianity did change things, whether you like it or not. Christianity developed charity in the sense that we understand it today. Hospitals, universities, all of these things. And to just look back at the ancient pagan past and pretend that those priests were all good people, or all moral, or all kind or polite, you're deceiving yourself. And the last reason I've noticed, and if you do see a reason that I haven't seen, feel free to put that in the comments. I do read those, most of them. I'll be blunt. I think that the modern world there's a difference between being nice and being good. And I think of some people who are very nice, who were good men. So I think of people like, Fred Rogers. I remember being a kid and watching that guy and just feeling utterly safe as a small person who felt powerless in an adult world I didn't understand. When I watched Fred Rogers, I thought, this is a good person, I'm safe with this person. But he was a gentle man, and I don't think he would pose any threat on the battlefield. But that wasn't his role. But I think one mistake we've taken from men like Fred Rogers and others is that being nice and gentle sort of means being weak, or that it's okay to be weak. I think that we've even, if I'm being blunt, sort of emasculated men in our culture. We blame them for being men until we need them. You may not agree with me, but I know so many men who feel that way. And I think that so many of the men who feel some sort of a pull to paganism, frankly, are looking for something sort of masculine. Have you noticed that, at least for most of my life, it's more women than men go to church? One of the reasons is we went beyond being nice or gentle or peaceful or meek, and we've sort of made it a bit feminine. And so I've had this problem myself, and so many of the men I know, or even served with in the Marine Corps, even construction workers, they can't resonate with an emotionally driven religion. And so they're drawn towards something, I think, in which they feel like they can be men. So the modern world stripped away honor and made a mockery of it. There's been poems, modernist poems, after the First World War, in which you think you're dying for honor or for country or for God or country, but really you've never held the pale, whimpering body of a friend who's dying from a wound, for dying for God or country or honor. It's not a glorious thing to this modernist poet. I can understand that, but honor is a real thing. It's a real feature of the world, and I think people should live with honor. And they think they see that in ancient paganism, Norse mythology, the Roman Empire. Today, it's hard to generalize. There's so many different kinds of people out there. And even inside of one individual, you might have contradictory feelings or thoughts. But there is so many men who've been taught to hate their country. If it came to it, they wouldn't die for their country. And what they don't understand is our country is a collection of our communities, of our families, of our neighbors. And those people, I want to believe, are worth fighting for. But to tell people that they're fools for trying to have honor, or trying to be willing to fight for their country, or to make some good in the world, or just stand on their own 2 feet and be a bit of a man, that's a mistake the modern world's made. We've also told men, so I see the extreme of acting like women are objects, and that they're just items of pursuit for men for their disposable pleasure. Wicked, stupid, childish, boyish. However, then to tell, you know how many men are so lost in the dating scene today? They don't know what they're allowed to say or do, or even if they're allowed to open the door for the woman. I thankfully am married, but I've been screamed at for opening the door for women, or I saw a female a female Marine who was trying to lift something into the back of a truck, and she couldn't physically do it. And so I went to offer to help her, and she dropped it and screamed at me because I was a male savior syndrome, yada yada, trying to help her lift this into the truck. What she didn't understand is I didn't think she was weak until she yelled at me. And I would have helped her if she was a man trying to lift that in the truck. Even if she didn't need help, I still would have offered to help her. But this has put men in a really awkward situation where they don't know how they're supposed to be, and I think some are reacting the wrong way. Because the reality is, men, for the most part, do want to have some sort of a lady who they can fight for, whose love they can earn. And I think some of the longing for paganism is sort of a longing to return to normalcy in that sense. And these are men who feel as though their cultural identity has been stripped away, and they're not allowed to be whoever they are. They're wondering who they are, and they're looking to the past. This isn't just men, this is women as well. All that to say this, just a few things. I'm a Christian. I converted to Catholicism. That was not, I've met people who went through so much more than what I went through. I've met people who lost their homes, who lost their family shunned them, and went through so many things. So whatever I went through, it's nothing compared to what the martyrs went through in the ancient church. So I'm a nobody, and what I went through is very small. But it wasn't an easy thing to convert to Catholicism. But what I know is, from reflection and years of study from multiple streams, is that Catholicism is ancient Christianity. Whatever state the church is in today, this is the church that goes back to Christ and his apostles. And this church, carrying out the teachings of Christ, and I think by the providence and grace of God, changed the world. And took the classical pagan world, and as that began to crumble, rebuilt it into Christendom, and gave us things like universities and hospitals, but also things that we take for granted today as Westerners. Nietzsche pointed out, he thought that Christianity sort of made men weak, and I did wonder that for a while. But to have restraint or discipline is not a weak thing, it's strength. And to go back past Nietzsche, one of the things I did is I read a book about chivalry by a chivalric knight. And it showed, I think, some things about Christian masculinity that has been very helpful to me. There are men who have lived and died with honor in service to this King of Kings and honoring this king's mother, who would fight, live, and die for a cause that they thought was not just their own cause, but the cause of their people. Bottom line, you don't have to subscribe to the sort of watered-down, weak, customer service, polite, fake polite Christianity of big evangelicalism. You know, I like Chick-fil-A as much as the next guy, quite a bit. But when you go there, and it's so like a forced friendliness sometimes. They're very friendly. I love Chick-fil-A, but I hope you see what I mean. I feel like American Christianity sometimes is a bit like a business where they just want you to like them and come back, and they're concerned for you, and they just really want you to get in. And so they treat you like a customer, and they're customer service reps. Listen, that's fine. They mean well. I'm not trying to put them down. But my point is, you can go back to something more solid in Christianity. Go back before Nietzsche. Go back before modernity. And you're going to see a stronger, more real Christianity. I think in the liturgies of the past, I find so much beauty and depth and meaning that I get emotional about, but they're not steeped in emotionalism. Catholicism feeds the whole person, not just the rational mind, not just the emotions, just the whole person. One thing that I thought was interesting was C.S. Lewis. He was an atheist who eventually believed in God and then eventually became a Christian. And he stopped short at a sort of a high church Anglicanism, darn near a Catholic, but he just never could bring himself to join the ancient church. His friend Tolkien, by the way, thought it was because of the sort of troubles in Ireland. But he pointed out, and he had talks with his friend Tolkien about this, they loved the ancient pagan myths. They studied these things. Tolkien did a translation of Beowulf, Lewis loved Balder the Beautiful and all these, ancient Norse, and I think he particularly loved Norse mythology. But he pointed out that myth, contrary to what we think in the modern world, isn't just something that didn't happen, a made-up thing, a lie. Myth is a bit more than that. It's sort of the way someone sees reality. It gives a people identity. Myth in the ancient world was much more than just a lie or something that was unfactual. He said that Christianity is the true myth, and he pointed out the similarities between Christianity and the ancient pagan myths, because there are a few, there's overlap. There's shadows and echoes of Christianity in Norse mythology, in Greek mythology, in Roman mythology, and yet they're so vastly different, even in those similarities. But Lewis pointed out, if God is God and He's true, wouldn't it make sense that there would be shadows of truth in these other people's religions who split away at some point in history from worshiping the one true God? Christianity is the true myth, not in the sense that it didn't happen, because for Lewis, that was the interesting thing. Unlike the pagan mythologies, this did happen. Jesus of Nazareth was an actual man who walked on this earth. He existed in history, and that's pretty much accepted by historians. But this extraordinary life, for which I would kind of struggle to find words, of this man who's just hard to reckon with, he's hard to dismiss. This is true fact. This is fact meets true myth. It's the transcendent being incarnated in the physical world in which we live. And that man, I think, is life-changing. So listen, if you are feeling yourself resonating with some of the things I've said, or you feel yourself pulled towards paganism, don't do it. I'll just be honest with you, don't do it. Don't be duped by this stuff. I think the myths are very cool. There's a lot of beauty and meaning there. But do me a favor, before you do this, go to a reverent Catholic Mass. Now, I think some of my Catholic friends disagree. I think there are reverent Catholic Masses in different varieties. There are Eastern liturgies that are in communion with the Catholic Church, and I know a lot of men resonate with those. There's the traditional Latin Mass, which can be very high and reverent and beautiful and meaningful. I was privileged to attend something called the Anglican Ordinariate, and that is a way for those Anglicans who are sort of disillusioned with modernity and the direction the Anglican Church has gone, the English Church. The English Church split away from the Catholic Church 500 years ago. I love those people, I love some of their liturgies, but it hasn't always gone well. And some of those Anglicans wanted to return to communion with the larger Catholic Church, the universal church. And so a pope made a way for them to do that, and he allowed them to keep their beautiful English liturgies. But it's pretty cool. I attended one, and I felt a little out of place because I wasn't familiar with the wording. But it was very old English. It felt like walking back in time. Very reverent. And then, though some people won't like this, I do think there are beautiful, reverent liturgies that are deeply meaningful, that sort of ask something of you to participate, to sort of rise to the occasion to worship God, that are in modern English, that are in our vernacular. Now, not all Masses are done as reverently, unfortunately, but there are some that are just so beautiful and meaningful and reverent. So if you feel drawn towards nature or something more human or deeper or more meaningful or even more manly, do me a favor, attend some of these Masses. Don't partake of communion, but go, kneel, see how worship is done. Because the reality is, Christianity eclipsed paganism for a reason. Our ancestors, some pagans and some Christians fought. But the reality is, a lot of the pagan kings converted to Christianity of their own accord. And it was for a reason. Maybe look into that reason. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you know your life matters. Someone somewhere loves you very much. Do take care of yourself. And as always, I thank you for watching.